Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are on this fast forward planet, which is wrapped in multiple layers of turbulent change, and including in the real world, there are wars that are still underway. There are uh, more pathogens waiting to become pandemics. There's everything out there you can imagine. There's climate change. And then there's the superstorm in
Sorry,
this.
I can't hear anything. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, you can't hear me right now? Can you hear me? Renee, do you hear me?
Oh, yeah, you sound great.
Okay, hold on. I'll stop the preamble and just say, we're here to discuss unsustain what? The superstorm that's underway in this system we call the media, online mostly, but radio and the rest, TV. And Andrew, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, yes,
Okay,
just
good.
fine.
And I couldn't imagine a better duo to have this conversation with, much of which will revolve around information that's designed to do things that take us in places we might not otherwise want to go. Propaganda is a good word for some of this, and we have Andrew Ryvkin, who we share a name. We as far as we know, we don't share actual family roots, but it's been really interesting to understand Andrew Rivkin's career, which involved producing propaganda for the Kremlin, for the Russian apparatus. And he has some really interesting new ideas about that. He's been making the rounds talking about pop propaganda, and how it's really an ecosystem. It's not just an emblem or the like. And Renee Hobbs, who's been on here before, who we shared a stage a year ago at the Bioneers Conference to talk about some of these same issues. And we're going to dive right in. And I've got to start with Andrew because, as Renee has said, we all produce propaganda to a certain extent. When anyone who posts something on Facebook, whether it's one of those you turn words into a block or whatever, you're trying to convince people of something. Mostly, I think, right? But we got to start with Andrew, who did this professionally within the Kremlin, and that's just to me kind of mind blowing. And you've written some really interesting pieces on your Substack and in the Atlantic Monthly on your journey. So maybe we'll start with you. How did you become that, and then how have you migrated to what you're doing now?
Hi. Well, interesting. How I became that is I was studying at St. Petersburg State University, which is Putin's alma mater, Ayn Rand's alma mater, also. So
What?
you
No.
you can see what they teach us. And just as I was about to go to my junior year, uh, I got an offer from a friend who said that his good friend is launching a lifestyle magazine, glossy. This is early 2000s. This is like 2006. So he was launching a glossy lifestyle magazine. I would say like GQ, Rob Report, these very glamorous, uh, pieces, publications, and he needed someone to head the editorial in St. Petersburg because the magazine was based in Moscow. Actually, in fact, it was so glamorous that it was based in France. It was based on the French Riviera, but it had its office in Moscow. And I started heading that magazine in St. Petersburg, so publishing it there, distributing it there, etc., becoming its sort of main representative. But as I got to know the magazine better, of course, it had all the right things that you would expect of a 2000s lifestyle magazine: ads for $100,000 watches and Mercedeses and trips to Switzerland to visit some Michelin star restaurants hidden in the Alps. But also, so in between these pieces that were quite legit lifestyle pieces from Art Basel and whatnot, you would have interviews with key Kremlin people These could be people who work directly in the Kremlin, or these could be people who influenced the Kremlin, like with ideology, for instance, Alexander Dugin, who is in the West, he's considered the godfather of modern Russian fascism and a spiritual advisor of sorts to Putin. That's debatable. Or you could have an interview with someone like Vladimir Medinsky, who now heads the Russian delegation whenever they talk to Ukraine in Istanbul. He's the guy that Putin sends. Also very, very powerful in the ideological sector. Now, these people in that magazine, they wouldn't look as if they're working for the Kremlin. They would be shown in a way that was organic for that magazine. So it would be photo shoots. They would be wearing fine Italian suits, or they would be in very good restaurants, and it would be black and white and very stylish. It was very important for, that's when I learned the basic of that. It was very important for, if you want propaganda to be injected, it can't be visually distinct from whatever it is you want to inject it into. That's how sort of the concept of propaganda was born. So yeah, I would say junior level of college, junior, and yeah, that's that magazine was my first job for the Kremlin.
And was there, I mean, did you feel like that you were doing work of the Kremlin at that point, or did you feel like you were working at a magazine and there was some torquing going on?
I would say I felt much more that I was working at the magazine because I wasn't the one interviewing these people. I wasn't the one placing them in the magazine. This was way above my pay grade. And this was, of course, this was in part financed by the Kremlin, even though the magazine itself was, again, a legitimate magazine. We had advertisers, everything was real. Hollywood stars gave us interviews. It was an absolutely real product, and that made me feel as if I was working more at a magazine than at a propaganda outlet. So I would say the publication was probably 85% to 90% real magazine and 10% propaganda. And at the time, I would say I just probably closed my eyes at the 10%. But also, it's very important, and this is not to justify any of it, obviously, but this was 2006, so propaganda was not as overt. Russia was not as belligerent. Putin was still in his legitimate term. I never supported him, but he was widely popular. He was actually popular because Russia's GDP grew. So yeah, I would say my feeling was more, I'm working at a magazine that just sometimes publishes these people.
Yeah, and let's just pause for a second before we get back into your journey. And Renee, you must have some questions.
Sure, I do. I have lots of questions. First of all, it's illustrating, your story, Andy, is illustrating a really cool point that propaganda sits at the intersection of information, entertainment, and persuasion. And it's the blurry boundaries that help propaganda to be effective. So my question to you is, when you were growing up before you got to college, how did you understand what propaganda was? Like, what do you remember about your early exposure to that concept? And how might that have affected your perception of the work that you were doing when you were still a young college student?
Well, you mean before college? Well, since I was born, I grew up in Boston, but I was born in the Soviet Union. And let's say in my I was very little when the Soviet Union collapsed, but I remembered that in my kindergarten, you would have a huge portrait of Lenin on the wall, and we would have these classes where the teacher would ask, who is the children's best friend? And I remember I got kicked out of that class because I said mom, and they were like, no, Lenin. What's wrong with you?
So just like we require students to stand up and say the Pledge of Allegiance,
Exactly.
you learned to do some things in school that were reinforcing ideas about who is in charge, what the values should be. So we understand education can sometimes function as propaganda too.
Of course, and I have to say, so towards the end of, so obviously I saw the red flags and everything. I remember that, but the influence of Soviet propaganda was waning to such a point, late '80s when I was little, that I can't remember anyone believing in anything in that sense. I do remember, speaking of the Pledge of Allegiance, when we came to America and I went to third grade in America and we started saying the Pledge of Allegiance, that felt like propaganda, because that felt even more hardcore in the sense than because in the Soviet Union, it was just say the word Lenin. And here it was hand to the heart and remember the words. And my instincts and my parents' instincts, when I told them that, they were like, oh my God, they're brainwashing you.
In 1988, I started out in the early 80s as a journalist at magazines. And this gets to the wider point of propaganda / advertising / where those lines are. My first global warming article was on the cover of Discover magazine in 1988.
Wow.
But on the back of the magazine was a cigarette ad. So this is a science magazine, Discover magazine, and we were selling concern about global warming on the cover and selling concern about which cigarettes to buy on the back. So in a way, and I remember being in that newsroom and not, I think there was some discomfort about some of our ads, but I wasn't thinking about it. I was just doing my job. So is that what is that, Renee? Is that?
Well, that's the attention economy, isn't it, Andy? That's the thing. Mass media function by attracting audiences, and they're subsidized by people who are willing to pay for access to those eyeballs, right? And so why would you spend so much good money just to get somebody's attention? Well, probably because you want to persuade them in some way. You want them to buy something, do something, feel something, believe something. So all mass media function to deliver audiences to the people who are willing to pay for them. And that means the economics of the medium itself are tied up with propaganda. And, now that's even more so on steroids, right? Because of digital media, right? So where you can finely tune in using algorithmic personalization to get just the audiences you want. So we shouldn't, it's weird. To me, it seems weird that in the training of journalists and media professionals, that more isn't made about this important role, right? That you will be participating in a culture where attention is commodified, and whatever you create or produce will have to fit in within that economy. And your beautiful counterpoint of the cover brilliantly illustrates that, doesn't it?
Yeah, and we're going to get to this point that Andrew has made in what he's been writing and speaking about lately, which is the ecosystem part. Propaganda isn't just an emblem; it's article choices, it's host choices. And when I was at Science Digest magazine, that was Discover earlier. I had to write I was assigned to write an article about the future of the automobile. And that was in 1985, 86. And the future of the automobile was the Ford Taurus. But it was absolutely driven by advertising. In other words, the editor of the magazine knew he was going to get ads from GM and Ford. And that's a compromise and a change in what what I would spend that time writing about was a function of the economy or the magazine's profitability. So, Andrew, we're going to get more into how to recognize propaganda and in a minute. But Andrew, I wanted to kind of click forward through your experience. You then ended up at GQ, the Russian GQ, or something like that.
Yes, when I after I quit the propaganda machine, I did a couple more projects for them, and then late 20s, I quit the propaganda game, and I decided to go into. I went into advertising. I worked a lot in advertising because a lot of my training in the Kremlin allowed me to do advertising. I worked with some of the best agencies in the world, but then I decided that maybe as part of a redemption arc, if you will, I decided that I want to talk more about. I want to tell people about propaganda. I want to tell people it's not just propaganda. Of course, it's how the people behind the red brick wall at the Kremlin think, what their way of viewing the world is, because I think that's a very unique experience, especially in Russia, that I wasn't covering it from a point of view of a journalist or from a point of view of a dissident, of an activist, but actually from a point of view of someone who was in an armored car with like police lights speeding through Moscow. Not that I had one, but I got a ride a couple of times. So, that's how I ended up at Russian GQ. I was their chief political correspondent for a couple of years when it was still active, because obviously at some point the magazine left Russia. A lot of publications left Russia, but I covered Putin's 2012 presidential election that he was going for his third unconstitutional, of course, term. So yeah, I covered a lot. And then I started writing for the Western press. I started with The Guardian and so on. But the transition was late 20s. Yeah, I kind of decided that maybe I should tell people about what I saw.
And what happened in 2012 here when you were beaten up by some other journalists?
Yes, I mean, they're not journalists. They were called. They were called journalists. So, well, this was. There's a saying about the Kremlin, also the KGB. The entrance costs $1. The exit costs $2. So it essentially means it's like the mafia.
Right.
Basically, I think it's the same mechanism, which it is. More civilized, probably. People have PhDs. So when I did quit the propaganda game, I started, of course, writing about the Kremlin, their inner dealings, things like that. Without, I would say, more from an analytical point of view as to like how it corresponds with today's events, which is what I still do at the Atlantic. I take my Kremlin kind of thinking and apply it to whatever's going on in the news. Now, a couple of people that I worked with in propaganda, they did not like that. They did not like that. So the day after the presidential election, so surprisingly, Putin won. And they called me up. It's not even them. I got a call from a press agency to do an interview. And I came to the interview, and right next to the building of this press agency, two people were waiting. I knew one of them. I didn't know the other one. And they just assaulted me, broad daylight on the street, half a mile from the Kremlin, almost knocked me out. And of course, being that it was Russia's Fifth Avenue, like Tverskaya, major street, very close from the Kremlin, police immediately showed up, immediately. And these people, they showed them government IDs, and these IDs were so powerful that the police was like, could you at least beat him up in some courtyard, like not on the street? Because I mean, it's okay, do whatever you want to him, but just not outside. So in that sense, yeah, there was zero protection for. I saw well, I knew it before, but now that I was on the other side, I saw how you can sort of bypass a lot of laws just out there on the street, like to the policeman. And one of those people, he was an official representative of Vladimir Putin in the election, Putin had 500 representatives from all walks of life, from doctors to engineers to whatnot. It was part of his campaign. And one of those people was there. And it's a very powerful document to have, that you're representing the guy who just became president for the third time. So, yes, and they assaulted me. I got, I went back to work. But that was sort of the moment that I was out of the game.
Yeah.
And I had so much hair back then. I could see it in the photo.
That kind of violence is what's sometimes called propaganda of the deed. Terrorism fits under that, right? When you use of physical threats to communicate, not just to you, this certainly communicated to you, right? But it also communicates to everyone around you. So,
well, it actually, Andrew just wrote about an example.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
Right here, Putin's explosive message to Trump. The choice of missile, this recent attack with a certain missile, with a multiple warhead missile in Ukraine. Could you just summarize that a little bit, Andrew?
You mean the ballistic missile that Putin launched, that the Russians launched? Right. Yeah. So it's interesting with Vladimir Putin. So much of what he does is messaging and propaganda. So much of it, much more than we think. So much of what he does on the battlefield is to propaganda. I would say the Ukraine war is war of two narratives as much as it is a war of two armies. Essentially, a good example, Putin is told, he's reported by his generals, and it's on live TV, and he confirms it and says so, that he captured the town, the town of Kupiansk. It's a relatively medium-sized city in Ukraine. Now, just a few days later, or a day later, Zelensky records a video in Kupiansk.
Right.
And in that, he essentially undermines Putin's narrative, and of course humiliates Putin greatly. So it's just an example. So for Putin, he needed a very powerful way to send a message. Now, he cannot do it by capturing a city. The war is almost at a stalemate. He can't do this by the Soviet style marching through Europe with a tank division. What he does have nuclear weapons. And so he fires a nuclear weapon. It's a nuclear capable weapon. It's a weapon designed solely for use in a nuclear war. It's a doomsday weapon, but he fires it with inert warheads. These warheads, when inert, they cause very little damage because the weapon, again, it's made to obliterate cities. But from all this security cameras in Lviv, the city that the Ukrainian city that was attacked, you could see, these multiple reentry vehicles entering on the city. They enter at 10 times the speed of sound. They enter from outer space because it's a missile that just flies this high, and you could see this image of doomsday because this is exactly the image of how the world is going to end. If should it come to a nuclear war, that is what it's going to look like, with the only difference being the explosion. Now, for Putin, this weapon, to launch it, I've heard various estimates, but it costs from $30 to $70 million. This is one of the most expensive things you can do because it requires an entirely different branch of the armed forces. You have to notify the United States that you're launching it, because if you launch it without notification, the US might fire back. They might think that you're attacking them. So it's a weapon of just incredible power, in every sense of the word. And of course, he's launching it with inert warheads to show that I'm still here. We're still a superpower. We can obliterate you, Ukraine. We can obliterate Europe because Lviv is about 50 miles away from the Polish border. And what is this weapon? Did the weapon destroy anything? No, not really. I think it ruined some warehouses or maybe a landing strip. It's nothing that can't be fixed. It's essentially like a few concrete blocks falling at the 10 times the speed of sound. But the message was clear. I still have the button. I may be stuck in the city of Kupiansk. You may humiliate me, but all it takes for me is to press one button. And that also is propaganda. Of course, Russian propaganda picks it up and they love this weapon. They praise it. To them, it's like a Wunderwaffe, so like a wonder weapon, like for Nazis was the imaginary wonder weapon that's going to solve the war. Russian propaganda picks it up, of course, and the patriotic pro-Putin, pro-war crowd goes nuts. But most importantly, this is a propaganda message to the West, delivered without Putin saying a word.
Yeah,
it is delivered through action.
And all this subsequent social media storm, etc. So Renee, I want to get back to you and to what we can all do. Obviously, that level of propaganda is not something you or I can do something about, except when you're seeing the social media feed related to it. But let's get to your some of your curriculum, essentially. You have an open website that I've often talked about as just being wonderful. Resource, Mind Over Media. People can search for that. And here you have sort of like this crowdsourced evaluation system. And I'm just gonna mute Andrew for a second. There's a little bit of a echo. So people can come here and you can kind of grade propaganda. Here's the gallery. Can you talk about how this relates to the teaching you do at University of Rhode Island, and then just sort of what we can all take your class essentially. So what are the key things here that we can learn?
Well, one of the things that's fascinating about propaganda is because it comes in so many different forms, education, activism, public relations, government and politics. It can be challenging to recognize. And this website is really designed to explore a concept that people don't think about. People don't sometimes recognize that propaganda can't work without you. The reader, the interpreter. Propaganda is not a magic bullet. It doesn't always work, and it actually can't work. If a propaganda message does not tap into your existing hopes, fears, and dreams, it will be ineffective. So this website invites you to evaluate propaganda and consider its benefits or harms. So Andy, what do you think? Is this beneficial or harmful propaganda, this AI generated Maduro image?
Well, I was on the website yesterday, and to me, the first question is beneficial to who?
That's it. And you know what? Isn't that interesting? Because everyone who creates propaganda feels it's beneficial, whether they're a paid worker like you or Andrew, or whether you're a true believer, right? So we always analyze the benefits or harms of propaganda by considering the author of the propaganda, the audience for the propaganda, the social context, and the larger society, right? So when we consider all these things, we can see a bit of a split. 22% of people who came to this site said it was beneficial. And how many? 33%. Oh, wow. With a whole bunch of people in between. Why do you think there are so many diverse interpretations of the potential benefits or harms to this particular AI generated photo? Why is there so much spread and so much difference of opinion about whether this thing is beneficial or harmful?
Kind of feels like America.
Oh, it reflects our polarized society. Good point, because we tend to believe is beneficial the stuff that aligns with our worldview.
I have relatives who are so attached to the Trump line of work that I'm not sure they would say this is beneficial, but I know people who are at that end of the spectrum, and clearly at the other end.
Yeah.
And if you're Venezuelan, there's a whole nother question.
Exactly. Then your political ideology might also affect your interpretation. There's differences of opinion about whether AI generated visuals are inherently bad, inherently good, or somewhere in between. So this is really designed to provoke classroom conversation about how our interpretations matter. And that's really important because sometimes people adopt a position of being helpless in relation to propaganda, right? They feel like propaganda is such a, powerful force that resistance is futile. But it turns out our active interpretation is the key ingredient. And that's what media literacy educators want to really focus on. Oh yeah. How about this one? A lot of people in the middle on this.
Oh, I just picked the middle randomly, but
I know, but you were the majority here. You were with the majority. So we're conflicted about whether executive orders like this are beneficial or harmful propaganda.
Yeah. Well, among other things, I just encourage people to go to the website and click around. I think the shortcut, just say what it is again.
Propaganda.mediaeducationlab.com.
Okay. Or just
to me, the most interesting examples are the ones that are at the intersection of entertainment and persuasion. Because, and Andy, you're an expert in sustainability, and you've helped me understand propaganda in relation to climate change really well. But I mean, Chevron and Exxon, they are the masters of this stuff. I came across the other day a music video produced by, I don't know, Exxon Mobil or Chevron, is like the catchiest song, sung by Jennifer Hudson. And I could not get that song out of my head. Yeah, because it told me how great the energy companies were in helping to address the climate change problem. There you
go. Oh, I think I found it. Check your energy.
Clean coal.
Yeah, clean coal is a classic example, right? I want to flip back briefly to the Russian experience, because I think you told me, Andrew, that did you work on this show, or you had some?
Yes, I co-created, co-produced, and wrote this show as the head writer about 1.5 years.
So hold on, I'm just going to play it for a second, just so people get the idea. Whoops, hold on.
Возможно, то-то, организаторы те-то, но вы знаете, когда проходил митинг, по-моему, все забыли вообще, кто был организатор этих мероприятий. Надо отдать должное.
So I'm going to turn off the volume and just tell us a little bit about what kind of a show it is. It has a Fox feel to it.
It does have a Fox feel to it. I would say we copied in terms of studio. There's probably less Fox and more French television. French TV studio is very open, light, camera moving around, airy. Doesn't have a table where you would have just a few people. Fox has a couch. Like, this doesn't have like you stand. Everyone has their own podium. The idea behind this show is called Honest Monday, so it would go live every Monday. The idea behind this show was very interesting. You have a host, and you have 3 viewpoints on a problem of the week. There's a problem of the week. So just like in, say, not sitcoms, like crime procedurals, there's a crime of the week, case of the week. This is problem of the week. This problem every week, for the most part, would be set by the Kremlin, because the Kremlin, I think every Thursday they would have a meeting in the ideological sector with most heads of large media organizations. Like TV station would be large. For instance, a magazine is not large, but TV, like big countrywide federal radio stations. And they would say, okay, so this is what's on our agenda. Let's say we're raising the minimum wage. We're thinking about raising the minimum wage, but we know that, say, the people, they're expecting this kind of raise. Our polling gave us these numbers, but we can only do this much. So we should kind of prepare the public that it's not going to be as much as they want. Or for instance, that they can't raise the minimum wage. It doesn't matter. It would be, for the most part, 9 out of 10, it would be these problems. It would not be, let's bomb America. 9 out of 10, it would be this. But 1 out of 10, of course, it would be, what do we do with the opposition who dare not love our country? What do we do with America? What do we do with Georgia, Ukraine? All the ideological problems that they would have. Then you would have 3 people. 3 people would represent 3 different points of view. Most of the times they were on the political spectrum from right, center, left. So you would see here, for instance, one of the people here in the studio. So this is the host, and I mean, camera's not panning to him, but for instance, he's a member of the opposition. At the time when this show was on air, which is 2009, 10, 11, you could have members of the opposition on television. Probably not Gary Kasparov, or not, I don't know, Pussy Riot, but you could have a lot of people. For instance, this man is in the opposition, and you would have these different points of view. My task was to bring the viewer to the idea that the Kremlin's point of view is the most sane one, that it's the best one, because the other ones are a little fringe. The other ones, they would just not benefit. The other ones would be like a little too left, reminiscent of the Soviet times. We don't want to go back to socialism, or a little too right, reminiscent of something that we also don't want, the empire, even though right now Russia went hard right. So this would be a show. It would imitate debates. It would imitate pluralism, just like Russia's political system at the time would imitate. It would be a multi-party system. It would have intense arguments in the parliament, all things like that. Putin would still hold the button. He would still be the main guy, and things would work out for him. Wow. So same thing with this program. It's an illusion of a debate. It's an illusion of people, the guests, this really is their opinion, what they're saying. They're not lying. Some are left, some are right, some are centrist. But the point is to align what they're saying into a structure that would lead the viewer to realize, well, the more centrist Kremlin point of view, it's actually best.
Boy, you're reminding me of the transition at Fox from the days of Hannity and Combs, which was a liberal and a conservative, to which also already, I think it was a bit of a setup most of the time, just as you were describing. But now, of course, that even the semblance of a setup is large.
Of course.
Well, and this phenomenon of who are we trying to persuade really it's worth bringing Noam Chomsky into the conversation, right? He basically said that sure, there was the propaganda for like the 80%, the herd, the people who watch sports, the people who don't vote. But he says the most important propaganda was for the 20%, right? The elites, who have to be persuaded that we have like a system that is legit, respectable, and and that we're not being controlled. So reinforcing messages that communicate democratic values, that's propaganda that has to be most deeply indoctrinated into the elites themselves, who I imagine are the target audience for Honest Monday.
Absolutely on point, because one of the brief for creating this show was TV for the people who don't watch TV. That was the brief. The brief was, it's 2009-10, younger, urban, hip, educated, more well-off people. They don't really want to watch boomers on television. They're all over the internet. They want to travel. So how do we get them? Well, we create a show where also a younger host, we're going to have a younger host. It's visually going to be much more appealing than what the rest of the television had. And you're absolutely on point. This was exactly the show to target the 20%, not the 80%. There were other shows for the 80%. People would scream, they would curse. It would be completely different. The vibe, everything would be different. This, people are wearing suits. You would have lots of young people here. So yes, the 20%.
And let's fast forward into the, that was 2009, 2010. Just even Twitter had just been born recently, 2007. And now we have social media where you have this these superimposed audiences. It's like every person is, and the liberals and the conservatives are all trolling each other, and it's gotten to this. This was, there's this kind of thing, and the White House was doing this intentionally. And I hoped he could come on the show today, but I only reached out to him today. Billy McLaughlin was the White House guy doing this stuff. I found him here. This was back in May last year. Fresh work by the White House's 30-year-old resident troll, Billy McLaughlin. Here he is. And he had come from the National Rifle Association, and he had worked for an Israeli lobby. And now he was in the White House doing this stuff.
Yeah.
So now, maybe we just briefly talk about this multiple audience reality. Like now everyone, whether it's Twitter, I still spend a lot of time on Twitter for various reasons, as opposed to Blue Sky, etc. But there's this feeling in the online sphere that you're talking to everybody all at once. maybe Renee briefly, and then back to Andrew.
Yeah, I'd say this idea of audience is complicated, right? Because we now can measure audiences with so much precision. We have a lot of evidence when we know whether messages reach audiences or not, because we can measure that now. To me, the power of the White House's use of memes, and it's Billy McLaughlin, but it's Kristi Noem, it's all kinds of people, right? It's lots of them, is that they're using the power of visual communication, right? No words at all are needed. And the real point here is to activate strong emotion. You're bypassing critical thinking. You're activating strong emotion. And essentially, with repetition, you create a new unreal reality, right? And I think that's a kind of time-honored propaganda technique that is one that really that everybody falls for. We all are subject to being attracted to and overwhelmed by compelling, emotional images. And in effect, their unreality is part of the appeal, because somebody's going to share this image, Andy, out of fun, right? And out of playfulness, and not even think about it, a political message. Because right now we're sort of I hope we're at the top of the AI hype cycle. I hope we're reached the maximum of that, but we're in the AI hype cycle where, is it gee whiz, isn't it cool what Gen AI can do? So this is a very powerful form of propaganda right now.
Yes, and Billy, he left the White House last August. He's now back in the private public relations sphere, but he did a piece, this really interesting piece for Fox's website. I made memes for the White House. Here's what I learned.
Oh, cool.
And I'm going to link it in the story I do after our show. One of the key points was young people, just as you were saying, Andrew, in Russia. He says these were not random stunts. They were designed to draw young Americans, many of whom had tuned out on politics, back into the conversation, and it worked. And he goes through the data. He says, we did not wait to react to headlines. We inspired them, from the 100-day mugshot display on the North Lawn to anime-style fentanyl dealers crying on camera. We pushed the boundaries of political communication. Andrew, I don't know, how much you keep track of this stuff now, but
I very much keep track of this stuff. This is the most interesting propaganda happening right now. What's coming out of Russia is completely, I'm sorry, as a propaganda expert, completely stale for the most part. The wartime propaganda, Putin propaganda, it's still very good at pop propaganda, but this is the stuff that changes the world right now. So of course I very much keep tabs on this. Well, I have to say, I just have one addition, maybe two. So you can share the image for fun, it carries a political message in it, of course. But also, if you share the image out of rage, they still won. If
Right.
you are an American liberal in a blue state and you see this image of Donald Trump as the Pope, and you're like, good God, what the hell is he doing? I'm going to send this to another one of my liberal American friends. We're going to connect on this idea of like, we're both enraged by this. The White House wins.
Yeah.
It's all about the views. It's not about what you think. They're not going to change your mind with a meme, but you're going to get it. That's the important part. So if you spread propaganda, you spread propaganda regardless of how you feel about it, regardless of like if you share a video of Trump bombing the No Kings protest, it's made to enrage you. It's made to be shared by liberals for the most part.
Yeah.
Most people sharing it are those who are infuriated. It's not MAGA that's oversharing it. Maybe some MAGA influencers, sure. So, and I would say this comes. I worked with this in Russia. It's a very postmodernist approach where nothing matters, where the message is the medium sort of is the message. It doesn't matter. And there's no truth. And you just mock. You just completely mock. If you can mock something serious like protests, you can mock something completely unserious. It doesn't matter. Everything is a joke. So they did that a lot in Russia, where the opposition would be mocked in a similar way, of course, before AI, before memes, but it would be mocked in a similar way. That way you kind of like, you dismiss and you degrade the opposition. And of course, people in the opposition would be infuriated by that. They would also share this information and it would also become effective that way. So this is a very, from what I'm seeing, I've seen this approach before, but of course it's perfected now in that sense.
Great point. I think there's a reason why the Oxford International Dictionary identified rage bait as the word of the year, right?
Of course.
So, and now when we teach media literacy, we always have used the phrase, to share or not to share. This is something you have to have critical thinking about, but now we definitely understand it in relation to the strong negative emotions and that like nihilistic point that you raised earlier. But I wonder about this because it's a debate within the propaganda expert community about whether or not the activation of emotion has to include not just negative emotions like hatred, fear, and envy, but that it also must encompass more positive feelings such as pleasure, joy, belonging, and pride. What's your take on how positive emotions are used in the context of Russian propaganda and or propaganda in the United States and around the world today?
I'll give you two examples. Russia has elections, and there's just not enough air quotes that I can put around that word. This is completely staged, rigged. It's not real, but it is real as a process. People do come in and vote. The Kremlin requires ballots. It can't just appoint someone. They have to be elected. It's a procedure. So people know that. Most Russians know that it's a sham. These are sham elections. They're rigged. It's not real. So, for instance, what the Russian propaganda did a few years ago, they were at polling stations where people were voting near voting booths. A lot of people who were election monitors who were also from the Kremlin. Everything is the Kremlin. The election, the independent election committee, the election monitor, just so you understand. And election monitors were live tweeting from these polling booths. And they were instructed, I think in Russia has 89 regions and maybe 20 of them, they were instructed to write, oh, a cat walked in to vote. And they would take a photo of the cat near a polling booth. So it would be propaganda because it would sort of bring down this degree of distrust, and it would sort of turn it to a more fun kind of way. It would be like, oh my God, a kitty. That's like so much for a kitty. And like you kind of forget that what Putin wore political prisoners because look, a cat is about to vote. They're just like us. So
Wow.
in that sense, that was a I will say good idea for them in there. It is like all propaganda bad, but like someone who came up with that is very smart. I don't see a lot of examples of that in Russia, especially after the war started. The degree of like militant, like it's very militaristic, and it's all based on negative emotions. But Russia actively uses the Kremlin, actively uses influencers, social media influencers, conventionally attractive women who would, post videos from Dubai and fashion weeks and themselves, and they would advertise makeup, and they would also post propaganda videos that they themselves shot. It's user generated content. It's very important that you don't repost anything Kremlin, that you create your own video, and that those videos would more often than not elicit emotions of, oh, okay, like I follow this lifestyle influencer. She looks amazing. She's in her amazing kitchen, like talking about stuff. And some of that stuff may be, well, Ukraine's not a real country.
Oh, wow.
So you could say that's more positive. I would say
Yeah.
nothing beats the cat example. Nothing beats that.
I noticed, by the way, The Guardian had an article about cats as a symbol for populist political propaganda.
And that idea goes all the way back to Edward Bernays in 1928. So to trace the origin back to why cats on the internet is a tool of propagandist, because Bernays was the guy who basically said propaganda can't be just against something. It has to be for something. And after all, he was the guy who said that propaganda was essential for democracy. So the idea is to sort of appreciate that propaganda can send beneficial messages, right? Depending on your point of view.
Well, and that also relates to...
No, of course it needs to sell.
Yeah. And you're also reminding me so much of advertising. Let me just mute again for a second. I did something. Oh, Al Gore years ago. The great climate evangelist. He said we're committing $150 million to advertising to promote climate action. And I interviewed some professors of marketing, and they said, well, Coke and Pepsi spend like $1 billion each a year to move the needle that much. Right. And you're throwing in this thing, trying to get people to care about climate change. And here I just found this. This is, I don't even know what this is, some website about advertising, marketing mobility. So cars are not, you're not selling the car, you're selling sex or the lifestyle or liberation. Right. It's all kind of intermingled, that what you're talking about. Now we have a few more minutes. I know, Renee, you have to leave, and I'm sure it's a busy time for you too, Andrew, especially you have a book coming out. Is this correct?
Yes, next year. I have 2 books that I'm working on. So one would be a memoir of me working in the Kremlin, and the other book, it is on the American perception of Vladimir Putin, because he is America's favorite politician after Trump. He is the most famous, and his image in the West is completely different than it is from his image in Russia. So it's a very interesting topic on how Hollywood in part built that image of Vladimir Putin. So yeah, it's 2 books.
Wow, that sounds like a lot of work. Well, I'll tell you that raises a really interesting question from my point of view. So, who came first? Was Putin drawing upon the Trump model of celebrity braggadocio, or is Trump been kind of aspiring to be America's Putin? What's the chicken or the egg on that? How those two get tangled together in such an intimate way?
Well, I'll say this. I remember watching Trump in 2016 with a friend from the Kremlin. I was out of the game. He was very much in the game. He was such a huge fan of Donald Trump. Not his. He didn't care about his policies. He was looking at him. He's like, I've never seen anyone as talented in this. He's like the way he speaks, the way he addresses the crowd, the way he says some of his policies, the way his innate understanding of media is incredible. That's the key difference between them. Trump always had an innate understanding of media. He's a natural. He does most things he does by himself. I've seen videos of him tweeting by himself. For Putin, he needed a team of people like me to do the same. So Putin understood the importance of media, importance of propaganda, of course, from the get-go, but he needed an apparatus, whereas Trump, it seems, doesn't really need it. The NRA person who did the memes, it's not really an apparatus, like an entire department in the White House. So I would say that's the key difference. I think Putin, in that sense, he came first in terms of doing it in politics. Trump came first in terms of just doing it because he was doing media. His name was all over New York way before Putin came to power. So he's been in the game much longer than Putin. He transitioned to politics, but you take this media capital with you to politics. Whereas Putin, prior to politics, he had zero media capital. He had zero recognition. Whereas with Trump, he would build and build and build on everything.
Wow. So I've got
That's also AI.
Yes, you're propagandizing your output on Substack. What are you working on short term in terms of your Substack and or for the Atlantic? Anything you can share?
I'm working right now. The Atlantic, I write as things happen. Basically, Putin fires a nuclear capable missile. I write. Thankfully, he hasn't fired yet. For the most part, I'm working on my lectures. I'm going on a small New England tour in a couple of weeks to speak at Yale, Harvard, BU on this phenomenon of pop propaganda with this lecture. So for the most part, I'm rehearsing because it's going to be a lot of speaking, a lot of talking, and I'm kind of afraid that, like I'm just not entirely good at, speaking every day for a few hours. So that's mostly what I'm working on as of late.
Well, it's if this is an introduction to the talks, it's a good. I look forward to seeing some of them. Here's at Harvard. I think it's February 9th.
Yes.
Pop propaganda, and the image on the right is that was related to recruiting for the war. Is that correct?
Yes. So I also made this image. So the image on the right was a photo. The image on the left, of course, is a very famous propaganda poster from World War II, from what the Russians call Great Patriotic War. And the image on the right is an influencer. I told AI to make it look in the style of the image on the left. It is an influencer who advocates. She's a fashion influencer, lifestyle. She advocates for mobilization. And she is part of a very interesting campaign to get Russians to not leave the country and serve in Ukraine. And this is her in a propaganda image that's no less propagandistic. It's less famous, of course, less recognizable. But this image of this modern woman holding a candy, it is an image it is as propagandistic as the image on the left.
Right. And as you were saying, having the user-generated content insulates
Yes.
the idea that this is some great.
No, you give these influencers, you give them, they work like an ad agency. You don't tell the ad agency how to do your campaign. You tell them the briefs, the insight, the problem, and the goals, and they can't come up with it. So same thing with these influencers. You tell them what you want to achieve, but they do it their own way.
Wow.
And that's very important.
Well, Renee, I know you have to leave, and why don't we call this a wrap? But maybe we can reconvene sometime, because there's a lot more to explore here about information, misinformation, and this thing called propaganda that we're surrounded by, and how to navigate it. This is Andy Ryvkin. This is the Sustain What enterprise I've been at for about 5 years, and almost 800 conversations. Lots more to do. It's just about how to get through these moments, these pinch points, using communication and conversation as a way to muffle some of the complexity and noise. Thank you both for being here today. Andrew Ryvkin, my almost namesake, and Renee Hobbs at University of Rhode Island. And on we go into the adventure. Take care.
Take care. Thanks.
All right. I'm going to end the broadcast.